Hi, my name is Peter Moe and I'm from Tourism Ireland's Nordic office in Copenhagen. Today we will be talking about Irish whiskey, and we have the perfect person with us here today to enlighten us on this. John Callally from Whiskey Island. Now John, you're very welcome to our show today. Would you mind telling our listeners what makes you an expert in Irish whiskey?
Hi, Peter, and thanks for having me as your guest here today. Delighted to be able to share the wonderful story of Irish whiskey.
Delighted to
Um,
hear it, looking forward to it.
yeah, I've been working in whiskey tourism for a long, long time. My father, who also works in whiskey tourism, he worked for Jameson's for about 30 years. He gave me my first job, my very first job ever, actually, when I was 16. And I that's when you're allowed to work here in Ireland. And I was working in the Jameson distillery here in Dublin in the tour side of things. So I was doing tours of Jamesons um, for guests from all over the world. And when I finished up in university, I stayed in tourism. So I learned from the best
Mm-hmm.
people in the industry about tour management. I worked for a lot of tour operators, day tour operators. And I suppose I'd never lost that love and interest in Irish whiskey. Um, and then when I saw what was happening in Irish whiskey, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about this morning, but in terms of the great boom in Irish whiskey, this is
Mm-hmm.
back in, I'd say, 2013, 2014. I saw a great opportunity here for um, a, I suppose, a specialized company offering whiskey tours and whiskey tastings, sort of like what they've done so well in Scotland for a long, long time. So 2017, Whiskey Island was born, and that's exactly what we do. Whiskey tours to the four corners of Ireland in a day or longer,
Okay,
and then we do whiskey tastings at events all over the country too.
nice. And is it where you start in Dublin, or is it where you go to the place first and then you meet up, or how does it work?
Yeah, so a lot of it's on a private, bespoke basis. So we'll get maybe anywhere from one up to 15 people. A lot of the time, they'll be staying in Dublin. And we'll either do a tour with them in Dublin, so we'll
Mm-hmm.
pick them up in the morning, and then we'll take them out and we'll visit a few distilleries without repetition. So we look at maybe the story or how Irish whiskey is made at the first distillery, but we don't need to hear that at the second and third distilleries. You know, so it's more of a we zoom in on what makes that distillery special. But then we'll go to the outskirts of Dublin as well, like Tullamore Dew
Mm.
is an hour outside of Ireland, or an hour outside Dublin. Sorry, just over an hour outside Dublin. So we'll do Kilbeggan and Tullamore in a day, and then we'll go to Sean's Bar in Athlone, and that's the oldest pub in Ireland. So that we find that's a big hit with our Nordic guests as well to get to Tullamore Dew, which is an amazing distillery. But then we'll get
Definitely.
people who'll come in and they'll do 8 days of distilleries. They'll just do distilleries. And even while they're here and they're doing distilleries every day, they'll ring me and they'll say, "Listen, I think we have a window later on. Would you book another distillery for us?" So they're just here for one thing and one thing only.
And there's definitely loads of whiskey to try in Ireland now. Yeah, but
Yeah.
how did Irish whiskey actually come about?
Well, we invented it, of course. Uh, I say that at whiskey tastings here, and then somebody from Scotland pipes up and says, "What? What did you just say there?" You know, the Irish and the
Hmm.
Scots have been debating this for years, um, and really, the truth is, we don't know who invented it because we're going so far back in time. And we have there was a book written here in County Kilkenny back in the year 1324. Kilkenny is about 90 minutes south of where I am here in Dublin. And in that book, and I saw it, I was down in Langton's pub in Kilkenny a couple of weeks ago, and the owner was there, Eddie Langton, and he showed me a copy of this book. And the very first words were aquavitae, which is the
Hmm.
original spirits, distilled spirits. So that seems to be the very first written account of whiskey distillation. But the Scots claim their book is around the same time. So that debate will continue and continue. Um, but we know that like it was we were around the 14th century. The Irish and the Scots were making a lot of this Uisce Beatha. That's what
Hmm.
we the original term for whiskey is Uisce Beatha, the water of life. And
Which is the same as aquavit, which also means water of life. So it makes sense that it was written like
exactly,
that.
yeah. And actually that's where we get the word whiskey from as well. It's if you look at Ishka
Yeah.
phonetically, it's anglicized because our when the Anglo
Mm.
Normans arrived, they couldn't really pronounce our Ishka Baha in whiskey in our mother tongue. So they if you read it Ishka phonetically, it comes out as whiskey. So in the 14th century, we were making a lot of whiskey from barley, and so were the Scots. And in the 18th and 19th centuries, we also know that Irish whiskey at that point was the world leader, totally dominated the world whiskey scene. We were Irish whiskey was accounting for about 60% of spirit sales all over the world, uh, and we were just keeping a little bit for ourselves. We were shipping it all over the world, and we had about 200 licensed distilleries.
Wow, that's
And the
amazing. That's a
whisk,
lot of whiskey distilleries. I mean, yeah.
yeah, yeah, but they were selling 12 million cases around the world every year, and thousands of unlicensed distilleries as well. But that's a story for another day. But the I'm in Dublin, North County Dublin, so I'm out near Dublin Airport. But about 40 minutes from my house, we had the whiskey capital of the world, and that's where you had the likes of Jameson and Powers, and actually at one point the world's largest pot still distillery, which was Roe, or
Okay.
OE. So we had everything going for us right up until the late 1800s, and then unfortunately it all sort of fell apart in the 1900s because of just there was so much happening in the world. Like the world was at war
Mm.
twice. We had war here in Ireland around that same period. Prohibition in the US, so that was our biggest market, and then it's gone overnight. We left the British Empire. It was hard to trade with the British Empire when we left, and then while all this was happening, the Scots were really gaining momentum. They had started blending whiskey, and that gave them a huge, overwhelming advantage over Irish distillers. And Scotch whiskey sales just took off. And by the 1960s, we were down to five brands of whiskey. So we had 200 distilleries at the end of the 1800s, and now we're down to five by the 1960s. Uh,
That's
so,
a massive
the,
decline.
yes, and the five that were still making whiskey were just about hanging in there. So they joined forces, and among them you'd have Jameson and Tullamore Dew and Bushmills, the other two being Paddy and Powers Go labels. So they were two very domestic brands, really. But they
Mm.
merged and created one company in 1966 that saved Irish whiskey from wipeout, and it's really when the rebirth began.
Okay.
Um,
But you said that there were, well, loads of questions here, but you said
yeah.
that it was a resurgence around, when was it? 10, you said? 2010.
Well, yeah, but really it goes back to 66 because they all moved to one distillery, and now they
Mm.
moved down to Cork in 1975, and they closed their individual distilleries. So that's why if you come to Jameson's in Dublin now to visit, you're visiting the old distillery. They don't make whiskey there anymore. It's all made down in Cork,
Mm.
in the very south of Ireland. But they Pernod Ricard, which are a big French drinks company, they came to Ireland in 1988, and they bought Irish distillers. And as soon as Irish distillers became part of Pernod Ricard, that put them on the world stage again because they could use that network that
Yeah,
Pernod
yeah.
have all over the world for Jameson to all of a sudden pop up in bars in Copenhagen and New
Yeah.
York and Sydney, all over the world. And that's what happened. And Jameson just took off. It became the poster boy for Irish whiskey, really. followed by Tullamore Dew and Bushmills. But there's a big gap between Jameson and Tullamore and Bushmills. And because of that, Jameson, it got to a point where, yeah, like 2010, around that mark, they're just, Jameson had become so big, they couldn't keep up with all the demand on their own. So luckily, distilleries started popping up here all over the country.
That's
And
fantastic.
in the last couple of years now, we're up to, at this point, we're up to 45 distilleries that are operational. So 10 years ago, we had 8. This year,
Wow.
we have 45, and there's 25 more that are work in progress.
Yes, because it
And
takes 3 years to actually make a whiskey.
yeah, and they open first, and then they make their first batch of whiskey, and then they lay down those casks, and they're going to be waiting at least 3 years.
Mm.
So any of the real small batch distillers, they'll probably go 4 years before they release anything, and then they'll want batches of older stuff in there as well. So um, it's that's the big challenge when a new distillery opens is how do you keep revenue coming in while you're waiting on your whiskey to mature?
Yeah, and that's been traditionally, at least the last couple of years, it's been gin, which has also made a whole other story of gin resurgences in Ireland, which is fantastic as well.
Yeah, some lovely gins out there. That's mostly these whiskey
Yeah,
distilleries.
exactly.
So,
Doing
yeah,
the short term because it doesn't need to
yeah.
mature for 3 years.
Oh, you've gin today. You make it today. It's ready tomorrow, and it's a good test run as well. So you get your network up and running with your gin, your distribution network, your key contacts in each market, and then when you have your whiskey ready, you're ready to hit the ground running.
Exactly. It's actually fantastic. So if you're considering traveling to Ireland and maybe whiskey isn't your thing, but the person you're traveling with is a big whiskey fan, I'm sure you can probably both be quite happy in Ireland.
Well, and that happens all the time because I'm in Dublin a lot, and I get a lot of couples. Even the last tour I wasn't out on tour yesterday. It was Monday, bank holiday here in Dublin, and I had a couple. Um, the guy really loves whiskey, and the wife can take it or leave it. And
Mm.
so this was a sort of a compromise. Rather than coming to Ireland and doing loads of distilleries, they did one afternoon of whiskey. So the big whiskey fan and the supporting other half.
That's fantastic, though. It's a good way to get to enjoy stuff together.
Yeah, yeah,
But I'm actually curious. So you have whiskey in Scotland, Whisky, but in Ireland it's spelled with an extra e. Why is
yes.
that?
It started here in Dublin actually. So these big distillers in Dublin, um, it was the world capital for whiskey making, and it had a great reputation. And the Dublin distillers maybe getting a little bit too big for their boots, where they were selling top quality whiskey all over the world, and they were um, of the opinion that Dublin whiskey was far more superior
Mm-hmm.
than countryside whiskey. So whiskey being made outside of Dublin, down in Cork, for instance.
Okay.
So they wanted to be sure that when their whiskey traveled the globe, that the consumer ordering a drink in Copenhagen, in a bar in New York, would recognize straight away that the whiskey they're ordering is from Dublin. So if they saw on the shelf that it was Whiskey, they said, that's Dublin whiskey, that's what I want. And rural distillers here in Dublin, or in Ireland, I should say, and also Scotch whiskey distilleries continue to spell it without the E.
Mm.
So when all those distilleries in Dublin and well around the rest of the country, when they all started to close and the remaining 5 brands moved all production down to one distillery in
Mm.
Cork, they all adopted Whiskey, and that's the way Irish whiskey is spelt today. Although in the rule book, you can make whiskey, you can spell it with the E or without the E here in Ireland. The rule for making whiskey in Ireland is it's distilled from grain 2 or 3 times, at least 40% ABV, and distilled and matured on the island of Ireland. And you can spell it Whiskey or Whisky. And there are a couple of distillers around Ireland who've reverted to the old spelling.
Really?
There's a couple of distilleries down in Waterford, for instance, Waterford Whiskey, in the middle of Waterford City. They have beautiful big blue cast iron gates as you approach to the distillery, and you've got, in the ironwork, you've got Waterford Whiskey. And they were saying that when they just unveiled the gates, locals were coming up and saying, you spelled whiskey wrong. And they were saying, I think we would have double checked the spelling before we had embedded it into the gates. So and it can actually now in Ireland be spelt both ways, and
Okay.
there are whiskey companies spelling it both ways.
Fair enough. But then traditionally would be a good way to spot if it's an Irish whiskey would be that it had the EY. But again, it's not a catch-all rule, I guess, then.
Well, the Americans spell it with EY as well. The Canadians, the Scots, and the Japanese spell it without the E, and then the Irish and the Americans spell it with the E,
Okay.
generally speaking.
Whiskey is so fun. it's
Yeah.
You think it's simple? No,
No, the
never simple.
terminology, it's very hard. Like at tastings to all the different terms and the different styles of
Hmm.
whiskey, they're not very self-explanatory, and makes it sometimes a bit difficult to explain them all clearly and concisely.
But you know what? It's still so fun to learn, and it's still so
Yeah.
fun to learn more about whiskey in particular. To be honest, I love it. It's fantastic. But then, just considering it's, well, you could say recent turbulent history of, well, up down and then now up a resurgence here. What does whiskey actually mean for Ireland or for the Irish people?
Well, apart from anything else, we like whiskey here in Ireland, and Ireland is one of the biggest markets for Irish whiskey. So we're
Okay.
enjoying, as you say here, learning about whiskey, and a lot of my group events will be for Irish audiences, and there's just that curiosity now about one of these booming industries, and people are enjoying. A long time, the profile of a whiskey drinker here in Ireland was an older gentleman who'd drink a pint of Guinness and he'd have a Powers or a Jameson chaser. But now people are really, they're spending a little bit more money on
Mm-hmm.
brands that cost a little bit more money, and it's just a voyage of discovery. All of these really delicious new whiskies that are arriving on our shelves, and Irish people are really having a good time exploring all these new brands and finding out about these new craft producers. It's a big employer now in Ireland, with 45 new distilleries. That's a lot of new jobs. So whiskey is a huge source of employment now. You've got all of these distilleries that need to be filled with teams of distillers, and you have a lot of students now that are going off to study distilling and brewing in college and university. And then on the visitor center side of things as well, nearly all of these distilleries have tours and tastings. So on the visitor attraction side, it's a big employer as well. And then we well, it's obviously not a great thing, but we pay a lot of tax. The distilleries pay a lot of tax on the liquid they produce in terms of VAT at 23%, and then there's duties on top of that.
Mm.
So it's it's a valuable source of revenue to the government. Um, and it is, well, for people like me in the Irish whiskey community, it's a really great thing to be part of. So we know what the story is of Irish whiskey, how it was once the world's most consumed spirit, and we can nearly, when I drive through the Liberties neighbourhood of Dublin, you can nearly bring that to life. You can imagine what the Liberties was like back in the 1800s with this Victorian skyline and all of these whiskey producers making world famous Irish whiskey. and now we're back to the beginning again. We're sort of in the infancy of this boom of Irish whiskey, and it's a really really great thing to be part of when you see, especially overseas visitors come here to Ireland. They take a tour with us, or they come to one of our tastings and just so pleasantly surprised by all the flavors that they're getting from our Irish whiskey. So it's a great thing to be part of.
It sounds an amazing thing to be part of. I mean, I've been to a few distilleries as well in Ireland, and it's just fantastic. The smell when you get in there, I, it it would if you've never been to to a distillery before, you would think it would be like the strong smell of alcohol. No, it's a strong, sweet smell of this complex. Like you can almost taste it in the air in terms of how the whiskey's going to taste. That you have this sweetness, you have this lovely aroma all around you,
Yeah,
and it's just well, I'm sorry, it's fantastic.
yeah. In the warehouses, probably is that where you are, where all the whiskey is
Yeah,
uh,
well, it depends
maturing?
on the places, of course, but yeah, the
Yeah.
warehouses, of course. Also, just in the fermentation pots where they are,
Oh yeah, yeah.
there's, I mean, that's fantastic. I love that smell as well, to be honest.
Well, your sense of smell is a powerful thing, and it's all part of the experience. It's not just about tasting the whiskey. Um, it's all about smelling as well, and like your for in detecting flavor,
Hmm,
your our sense of smell is often underrated. Um, but it's a powerful thing.
yeah. Now, I thought I'd bring in something a bit more for the people who aren't necessarily that much into whiskey yet, but what's I'd say whiskey, Irish whiskey is like it's not. You don't have to drink it just pure. You can also use it in cocktails. I don't know
Yeah,
how fond you are of whiskey cocktails. I like them a lot.
yeah.
Um, do you have any good tips for like what's a popular Irish whiskey cocktail, or what's maybe a good whiskey cocktail to start with, if you want to get into Irish whiskey or whiskey?
Yeah, absolutely. There's whiskey cocktails are they can't be ignored here in terms of determining how popular Irish whiskey has become around the globe.
Mm,
Mixologists all over the world are using Irish whiskey as a base spirit because it sits so well in a cocktail. And if you have the right ingredients and the right glassware, you can make yourself a cocktail at home that would be the equivalent of what you'd get in a five-star hotel, you know. But it's all about good ingredients and good glassware. So, for instance, I make cocktails quite a lot at events, and I
mm,
like to put an Irish spin on the most famous cocktails. So the Dead Rabbit pub in New York, it's sort of a world famous pub, have an Irish old fashioned. So when you're
okay.
the whiskies, in terms of the whiskies you're going to use, like you'd want to maybe for the most part be using Jameson, a young blended Irish whiskey like Jameson Original IPA, the Stout edition, which I know you can get
Mm,
all over Denmark and the Nordics. And or Tullamore or Bushmills. Um, but we just be substituting one or two things in that classic recipe. So you'd be taking out the sugar syrup and replacing with a lovely herbal liqueur called Benedictine Dom.
okay. Yeah.
Um, and so you're going to mix all that together in a mixing glass. You're let's say throw in there, be nice and generous, 50, 60 mils of Jameson or Tullamore or
Hmm.
whatever young Irish whiskey you can get, and then pour in about 25 mils of Benedictine Dom, two dashes of Angostura bitters, and two
Hmm.
dashes of orange bitters. Stir it all around and then pour it into a rocks glass with a little bit of orange peel as well. Now I can send you these, and maybe they can be. I know it's going to be a hard one to remember, but that's just such a premium, delicious cocktail that you can just make at home. But you just have to go out and get those ingredients.
Yeah.
You can't really, and have good proper glassware as well, and well packed ice. Not ice that you keep in your freezer at home in those little containers, and they start melting when they get into the glass right away. You want good, thick. blocks
Okay.
of ice that aren't going to melt straight away. Or a whiskey sour. I made beautiful whiskey sours there at Christmas time at an event for Teeling whiskey. But again, you're taking out a couple of the classic ingredients, and so Teeling
Yeah.
small batch, you're going to find that on the market. You want some lemon juice, some honey syrup,
Hmm.
apricot brandy is the secret ingredient there, and then you want your egg whites, and then all shaken up and then poured into a small coupe style glass. Then the Irish coffee, our most famous whiskey cocktail.
Yeah.
People always fall down with the cream. You want to buy fresh pouring cream, in its
Yeah.
purest, most runniest form, and you're going to likely whip that yourself. But important to get the glassware right there as well. You want a glass that's just under maybe 200 milliliters in size, that can take 200 milliliters. Good proper coffee, good proper tasty coffee. Don't be using your best whiskey, just entry level young
Yeah.
blends, and heat the glass before you pour in any coffee. The drink
Heat
will
it.
stay warmer for longer.
Oh, right. Okay. Fair.
Um, and then the whole trick is shaking up the cream to a point that it's not going to be too overly whipped, so it won't come out of the shaker, or you haven't shook it for long enough, and it comes straight out of the shaker into the glass, and the cream sinks all the way to the bottom.
Okay.
Uh, One,
Sounds
two, and three. They're the good Irish whiskey cocktails that I would experiment with.
fair enough. And just to add here, what would your favorite be? It doesn't have to be one of them though.
Do you know what? There's a bit of work in that. Okay, my favorite Irish whiskey cocktail is something that you can make really easily at home. And we had a big party here at the house recently, and we had lots of family in and a couple of friends. And I put in the corner, I made up a batch
Hmm.
of a really easy to make cocktail. So I can't remember what whiskey I had, but it was a young, maybe it was Jameson, but I had a large bell jar,
Hmm.
put in the whole bottle of Jameson, so all 700
Yeah. Yeah.
mils, a full carton, 1 litre of cranberry juice,
Yeah.
and a full carton, 1 litre of apple juice. Just
Okay.
stir it all around, and pour into Slim Jims with a couple of cubes of ice and a slice of lime.
That sounds
And
lovely. It sounds refreshing.
yeah, it's really, now it was in the middle of winter, but it still went down okay. But it is really easy to drink, and it camouflages the whiskey. So for people who don't really like maybe the
Hmm.
harshness of whiskey, the whiskey just fits in there perfectly. I had to put on a second batch, and now I was getting text messages the next day. Nobody was happy with me the next day, but on the night of the party, they were like,
They were
"Wow,
thrilled.
get
Yeah.
some more of that made pronto." Yeah.
That's fantastic. Um, a few last things here. Any Irish words or sayings you might want to share?
Um,
We've already had whiskabara. Sorry, whiskey. Oh God, I can't say it.
well, what about a little toast then? A nice. Well, I'm not going to drink it now, but I have to have something in my hand when I do an Irish toast,
Yeah.
and this one is health and long life to you, and
Okay.
land without rent to you, a husband or wife of your choice to you, and a child every year to you. And may you be in heaven half an hour before the devil knows you're dead. Sláinte.
Sláinte. That's quite the saying. That's really nice.
We love our toasts here in Ireland, yeah.
Yeah. And I think finally, where or how can our listeners get in contact with you to find out more what about what you have on offer, how to take your tours?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm always available, every day of the week at whatever time. And so you can call us directly.
Hmm.
The easiest place, if you go onto our website, you'll see both our numbers. I won't call them out now, but nobody will remember them. But we have our email address and our phone numbers on our website, which is whiskeyisland.ie, and whiskey spelt with the E, of course.
Okay.
Um,
important point here to make. Actually, yeah. No, that's
Yeah,
perfect.
but that's yeah. We're always happy. Like if you get into on our website, we've got a list of all the tours that we do. Just that's food for
Mm.
thought. It just shows you where we go and what the style of the tours are. But a lot of the time, people will get in touch directly. They'll tell us what they want to do and where they want to see, and then we'll build it from scratch. So it's we're not so much about being off the shelf here. It's all about
They're more meant as appetizers to show what you can do, rather.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
exactly.
that's absolutely fantastic. So you get it built around your preferences and your likes. That's amazing. I like that. That so if you're new, you can do something for people who haven't tried it much. If you're in a certain area, you can do one themed around that. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. It
Yeah,
more fits
people
into your Irish holiday than just taking a box standard one.
exactly, yeah. And people like we often go to Guinness Storehouse in Dublin as well. People want
Hmm.
maybe half of it to look at the world of Guinness beer, our most famous beer, and then we'll do a little bit of whiskey after that. So we're totally flexible.
That's absolutely fantastic. Well, thank you, John. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here today. And yeah, I can't wait to drink some more. I'm actually going to try that apple juice, cranberry, and whiskey, and with the slice of or with the peel. That sounds
Slice of
fantastic.
lime, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, you won't regret it. But I'm sure you'll probably wait till after work, will you?
Yes, definitely. I'll have one
Yeah.
this evening. All
Yeah.
right, John. Again, pleasure. I look forward to speaking with you soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter. Thank you, and good to talk to you.